What if alcohol was still banned today? How much different would our world be? Our group was astonished at the differences in the distilling industry between the Prohibition era until today's time period. We wondered how these differences came about and what the significance of these changes were. The changes in the moonshine industry until now is a very controversial topic that has been a key component in shaping our economy today. Our group has been fascinated with the differences in the moonshine industry since we listened to the Moonshiners and Revenuers podcast. We have read, researched, and interviewed individuals about the history and changes in the moonshine industry in the classroom, online, and through conversations. The moonshine industry has changed through the difference in distillery locations, methods of distilling, and moonshiners' behaviors from the Prohibition era until now, especially in Kentucky. First, we will discuss the history of moonshine distilling industry. Second, we will discuss the moonshining industry today. And finally, we will discuss the differences between both and relate this topic to the great state of Kentucky.
Prohibition changed the landscape of the United States in the 1920s and 30s. More so, the illegal sale of alcohol shook up the economy of this time. From 1920 until 1933, the purchase, distribution, and manufacturing of alcohol was outlawed countrywide. During this time, the sale of moonshine skyrocketed, and the illegal spirit was the primary form of illegal alcohol. According to Earl Dabney in his book Moonshine Spirits, quote, "If a town outlawed the legal sale of liquor, the demand for moonshiners and their product became even greater." End quote. Moonshiners took full advantage of this, taking to the hills and setting up distilleries as new towns joined the Prohibition. The distillers found a common customer: the working class and the destitute. These people were highly unlikely to sell out the moonshiners to the police, making them a very safe buyer. The negative outcome, however, was that these buyers did not have the money to drink heavily and regularly. During the moonshine boom, millions of dollars in revenue went untaxed by the government. This boom was due largely in part to the ability to create large batches of the spirit, giving the shiners the ability to produce and distribute large quantities of alcohol to willing buyers. In modern times, however, taxation is killing the moonshine industry. According to the Kentucky Distillers Association in 2017, moonshine breweries are taxed 16 cents for every dollar of output, compared to most other manufacturing sectors, which are taxed less than a penny per dollar. End quote.
Our group decided to interview Macy Jo Bradshaw. This interview furthered our research on this topic because she grew up in a small town in Kentucky where moonshine was very present and she was very familiar with the substance. What do you know about moonshine?
Well, I am from Kentucky, so I'm from a really small town, so I've seen some moonshine at home, just like made by people around my town. I've seen the show Moonshiners, and I know that it's illegal and it's really strong and made in a copper still and clear. And that's about it.
Have you ever had moonshine, and if so, how did you get it?
I have had moonshine a couple of times. Most of the time when I've had moonshine, it's been a Christmas present from some of my dad's friends to my dad, and we've kind of shared it with the family. And other times, some of my friends just around town have had like apple pie moonshine from their relatives and friends that have made it.
What do you find most interesting about the illegal moonshine industry?
I think the most interesting thing is how people pass on their recipes and their techniques from generation to generation, and they kind of make their own ways to make moonshine. It's kind of like with any other alcohol, like with beer and whiskey, everyone has their own recipe, but with moonshine, they have to pass it on by word of mouth instead of like through a company, so that's really cool.
The moonshine business today is very different than how it was during and around the time of Prohibition. Moonshine was made legal in 2010 and can be purchased and used as clear, unaged whiskey or rum. According to CNN's Kieran Monks in June of 2015, quote, "The first legal distillery in Tennessee opened its doors in 2010, and others followed in Kentucky, Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina." End quote. It is primarily used as cocktail mixes, however it still has a very strong taste. This makes it unpopular for customers who are just looking for a good taste. However, many alcohol enthusiasts enjoy the drink. Moonshine was illegal until 2010 due to its aversion of federal tax. as well as the fact that moonshiners avoid paying warehousing and distribution costs. Alcohol taxation makes up a major portion of the federal taxes collected by the government. Moonshiners avoided these taxes, making it important for the government to catch the individuals responsible for distributing this illegal product. Bourbon companies pay a very large sum in warehousing their bourbon, oftentimes for years. Also, distributing costs weigh heavy on these bourbon companies as well. Moonshiners avoid paying for both warehousing and distributing, which provided an unfair advantage years ago.
Now that we have talked about how the moonshine industry has changed over the years and also how the industry is today, I will talk about the difference between the moonshine industry during the Prohibition era and how it is in modern time. I will also talk about how moonshine relates back to Kentucky. There are many ways the moonshine industry during the Prohibition era differs from how the moonshine industry is today. One difference between the two time periods is where moonshine is distilled and manufactured. During the Prohibition era, most of the moonshine made in Kentucky was made in the eastern mountains. Moonshiners would hide out in Appalachia to try to be as hidden as possible. After distillers made a batch of moonshine, they would have getaway cars that looked just like any normal car to transport the illegal alcohol. They disguised the cars so they had less of a chance of getting caught. However, moonshine today can be made in legal distilleries. Quote, "Once the libation of hillbillies and hustlers, moonshine is now a popular product that you can easily get your hands on, even without Grandpa's backwoods still." End quote. Spectre 2016. This quote shows that it isn't just made in the backwoods anymore, but the only way moonshine is legal today is if you distill it and proceed to sell it with a permit or license. Another difference between the Prohibition moonshine and today's moonshine industry is how long the distilling process took the moonshiners. When making moonshine before the Prohibition era, it would take up to a month to make just one batch. However, in modern times, it takes about 10 to 14 days to complete a batch. The reason for the faster completion time now is all of the advanced technology we have today. Now that we have compared a few differences in the time periods, I will talk about ways moonshine relates back to Kentucky. Kentucky was a popular place for moonshiners to come and produce moonshine because of its geographic location. Kentucky is considered in the Appalachian region, with parts of eastern Kentucky in the Appalachian Mountains. A more recent connection to Kentucky is from our primary source. This source explained an illegal moonshine bust in Louisville, Kentucky. Quote, "This moonshine operation wasn't hidden in the woods, but rather in a building right off the ever-busy Preston Highway. On the outside, there are black covers on the windows and no trespassing signs on the walls. On the inside was a lot of moonshine." End quote. Martinez 2018. This quote shows that in today's time, due to technology, moonshiners can have distilleries in buildings or warehouses. Kentucky government has tried to reduce moonshine production, but they have never been able to completely stop it.
For our project, we decided to interview William Sparks Sr., a man born and raised in Lexington, Kentucky, who has a special relationship with the illegal moonshine industry. We sat him down for an interview so we could get a closer look at his relationship with the substance. This interview furthered our research on moonshine by interviewing someone who had grown up around it and knew the positive and negative effects about the controversial liquid.
Have you ever had moonshine? If so, how did you obtain it?
First time I had moonshine, my brother-in-law brought it to me. I didn't have any great love for it.
All right. And what have you previously known about moonshine?
Well, moonshine goes all the way back to the Scottish country in Europe before they settled in America. And basically the government doesn't like it because, one, it's not taxed, and two, it's not regulated.
All right. And last question. Do you think homemade moonshine distilleries should be legalized? And if so, should the tax on all alcohol be removed?
Well, I think they should have they should let the moonshiners go, but in order to make it legal, they would tax it and regulate it.
Okay. And you said something about bad moonshiners and how they give like shiners a bad name. What do they do that makes them bad?
Some of the bad moonshiners would filter their moonshine through car radiators in order to cool them down. When they filtered them through car radiators, it would pick up the antifreeze and poison the people who drank it.
All right, thanks a lot. This image shows us the story of Ricky Estes and Ronald Lawson, both men who have been making moonshine for their entire lives, following the footsteps of many generations before them. They were both like-minded guys who had no plans to stop making moonshine because it was comfortable and provided an income. In 2009, getting a distilling permit became possible, so Kaufman decided to open Short Mountain Distillery, which specialized in locally made and organic whiskey. Then he decided that he would like to add moonshine to the menu. After deciding this, he called up Ronald Lawson and asked him what he thinks about selling legal moonshine. Lawson, immediately at a loss for words, thought Kaufman had perhaps gone crazy because he believed there was no such thing as legal moonshine. He was mistaken because there was, and that's how they got into the game of distilling and distributing legal moonshine.
Here we have an actual picture of packaged Old Smoky moonshine, which is sold today in distilleries and even Walmart. This image is helpful to our research question because it is current to today's time. It shows us that a once illegal liquid is now sold in big-name distilleries and superstores.
This image tells the story of Digger Maines and Mark Ramsey, two very well-known distillers. They are an unstoppable duo in the distilling industry due to their knowledge and passion for their tasks. They have many different flavored alcohols, including many different tasting moonshines. We got to hear their opinion on why moonshine is still important and what it means to them. In their eyes, they see a liquid that helps fund their communities, that helps support families and build churches. They have a great respect for shiners because they saw men who would work their normal jobs just trying to make a living, and then continue working hard to make even more so they can support their families and communities.
Today, we went over the history of moonshine in the distilling industry. Second, we showed how modern moonshine distilling works and the rules and regulations that go with it. Finally, we showed the difference between the previous moonshine distilleries and the modern moonshine distilleries and how they are related to Kentucky. The moonshine industry has changed through the difference in distillery locations, methods of distilling, and moonshiners' behaviors from the Prohibition era until now. The story of moonshine is long and unique because there isn't any other alcohol that has been such a big part of American history. Moonshine will always be around, whether in mason jars or in stories. It is a never-ending tale that will live on for generations to come.